Now at noon, crews still battling a massive cargo ship fire. It erupted yesterday in Blunt Island. 9 firefighters recovering after being injured trying to contain the blaze. 8 of those that were hurt in an explosion. News for Jax learned in the last 20 minutes. Jax Fire Rescue will not send a crew back into the ship. It is just too dangerous. Meantime, firefighters working trying to keep the exterior of the ship cool in an attempt to maintain the integrity of the hull.
All right, so what we know right now at this point, the Coast Guard oil response team is also docked at the ship. Their goal to protect the environment. The team plans to put an oil boom in the river. There is already a 500-yard safety zone established around the ship. We have multiple crews in the area. But first, let's turn things over to News for Jax's Jim Piggott. Jim, what can you tell us?
Well, the fire chief just walked up behind me. I think if you see behind me, you can see the ship. It's still burning. That's very heavy, but I want to talk to Chief Powers here along with the Coast Guard. Chief, what's the latest information that's going on here?
So I'll let Captain Blonde from the Coast Guard talk about the operations going on at this ship. I'll update real quick. We've had a couple of our personnel that have been released from the hospital. I just got a text when I was walking down that a third one is being released in the next few minutes. But we've got a couple more that are going to have to spend some time in the hospital.
And we are definitely going to talk with the Coast Guard, but I got to ask you, their injuries, the ones that are in the hospital, how are they doing?
There's 4 or so, 5 of them that have got some pretty significant injuries. They're going to be out a long time. The recovery is going to be a long period. They're stable, but their recovery period is going to be long. They've got some significant hand burns, and as with hands, we talked about this morning, the hands are hard to heal when they're burnt.
But they're going to be okay?
They're going to be okay, just a long recovery.
A lot of public wants to know how they could help at this point. Anything that you would want them to do?
Just pray. They need to pray for those people and their families. Obviously every one of those men that are hurt right now have families at home, women, children, wives that are there, and they're just those people need that comfort and that prayer.
Chief, and I am going to talk to the Coast Guard, but your investigation of this, you're staying outside just putting water onto the vessel, correct?
Yes, sir, and that comes from the recommendation of the Coast Guard from Captain Blonde. We had a meeting last night, and the integrity of the hull is the most important part, and he asked us if we could just keep the hull cool so that the hull would not be compromised. That's the best thing we can do right now, but he's the expert to speak to that.
And Captain, let me ask you, if you don't mind, sure. What is the situation now? What's happening here? What are we seeing?
So the upper decks of the ship continue to burn. So basically everything above deck 7, which if you're looking at the ship on camera is about 2/3 of what you can see up the hull. That top layer is basically on fire from stem to stern. That we're showing hot spots through the IR cameras all the way from one to the other. What we're trying to do now, the absolute number one priority is safety of our first responders and the safety of the public, which is why we're monitoring for pollution and we're monitoring for air pollution. But the next step below that is to try to maintain 2 things, the integrity and the intact structure of the hull, and then try to keep the ship afloat. Because if we can do those 2 things, we can keep the ship cooled and intact and afloat, we can minimize any threat to the environment or any continued threat to the public. And that's why we're putting water on the outside of the hull now, is to keep the outside of that hull cool and then ideally keep it intact.
Captain, do you think there's any danger of further explosions?
At this point, based on what our engineers are looking at and the fire being up top side, we think that threat at this point is minimized, and that's the other reason we're trying to keep the fire contained up high where it is and cool, is to avoid getting it down into any of the machinery spaces, which would increase that risk.
I know you have investigations that are going to be going on with this, NTSB, probably OSHA, but do we know if this was caused from like some of the, like why their safety measures didn't kick in, some of the things that they haven't, did they just not work?
That will be the first thing we'll look at in the investigation, is determine first the cause, and then we will go through essentially the entire air link to figure out, was there something that worked and didn't work properly? Obviously there were, because the installed firefighting systems should have contained this to some extent, but you never know. Each fire is completely different, as Chief can tell you, and we're going to have to go in and basically do a stem to stern analysis on this ship to determine what caused it and then why it became uncontained.
We knew yesterday that the 21 crew members were okay, but is that the situation? I mean, no injuries there, and the remaining crew, everything fine?
There were no injuries to the crew or to the stevedores that were on board loading the vessel. So everyone that had been on board when the fire broke out did safely make it off.
This was heading out of port, or heading out here, I guess, fully loaded with the salvaged cars. Is that maybe what caused it? A car in there, or just too early to say?
It's really too early to say. That's one of the first things we'll look at from the investigation, like you would with any fire or marine mishap, will be to try to identify the cause based on when we get on board, right. What the source appears to have come from.
And Chief, I'm going to finally end with you on here. What can we expect from JFRD? Are you guys going to be out here for weeks or what?
We're going to be out here until the Coast Guard says they no longer need us. Obviously, there's some private contractors that are in here as well, but we have a mission to keep the public safe around here and to help protect the private companies that are working in here. Obviously, if there was to be a mishap, we need to be here to be able to rescue them as well.
And what we're smelling now, that's not dangerous. That's nothing. There's no toxic fumes, correct? Or
yeah, I mean, obviously, any smoke is not the greatest thing to breathe, but we've got air monitor quality. The air quality is being monitored around. We got our hazmat team out here monitoring that, and I don't think this is going to happen, but should levels become unsafe, we would obviously start looking at moving people back further.
Right. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So we just got an update from JFRD and the Coast Guard of what's happening out here, but we're going to see more because we've got a better view here. Vic Michelucci is standing by out on the water to show us what's happening there.
All right, let's go to Vic. He's live right now on Marine 4. From the boat, Vic, what can you tell us?
Yeah, so you are looking live right now. We are 500 plus yards away because that's the safe zone established by the U.S. Coast Guard and the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office. But what we're seeing is smoke continuing to billow out. You see that white smoke lower and then the thick black smoke. That's the bad part, and it comes and goes, so there's flare-ups. At times we've heard some loud noises, kind of like a pop or a bang there. I want to introduce you to our captain because we are on board Marine 4 with the Freedom Boat Club of Jacksonville. This is Captain John Eddy, and you are not only guiding our boat today so that we can get a viewpoint of this firefight, but you have a long list, and your resume is very long with maritime incidents like this, specifically working in the United States Coast Guard yourself.
Yes. That and being a merchant officer, I've seen fires aboard ships before.
What's your initial reaction? Because you and I arrived at the same time seeing this in person for the very first time, and I'll say it's impressive to see.
It is impressive. It starts as a small fire in a boat, and if the crew doesn't catch it fast enough and the alarm systems and the sensors don't go off in the boat quick enough, it escalates into something. And this boat's carrying used cars, so they all have gasoline in them. And if gasoline tanks go off, it spreads. And then you've got the paint inside the boat and the bulkheads and stuff catches fire, and it spreads.
We're looking at the firefight right now. I see 1, 2, 3 Jacksonville Fire and Rescue boats, as well as a private vessel also working on this. What is their goal when it seems like, it's an impossible task right now to put these flames out?
What they're doing is keeping the outside hull cooled down to keep the hull from buckling, or what's called a hull fire. If they do that, then the boat will maintain its integrity and stay afloat. Otherwise, what can happen is the hull can crack, and she'll take on water and founder.
Captain John, we just heard the chief with Jacksonville Fire and Rescue, Keith Powers, say they're not sending more people in. Is that a good choice?
In this respect of looking at the smoke, that's probably a good choice. It really is. Depending on how far it's spread inside and what the bulkheads have been able to contain, it looks like most everything's coming from the back third of the ship, but the ventilation system is blowing smoke out throughout the whole entire ship.
And you've got a lot of experience not only being on these vessels, but training the people that are on these vessels. They are the first line of defense. They are firefighters, so likely when this started, they tried their own fire suppression response before calling in for backup.
Everybody on a boat's a firefighter. Doesn't matter if you're the captain or the cook. Everybody's a firefighter on a ship. And yes, they have their own suppression systems inside the vessel, and it might have gotten away from them. And they're lucky they're sitting here at the dock where they can take other help from land-based firefighters.
Certainly. Let's talk about for boaters, because we're showing a fisherman right here, and he's about to be warned and briefed by the Coast Guard about this containment zone. What do you need to know if you're out on the water around this area?
I would stay far away from it. One, from the environmental hazard for the smoke because of the toxins in it. And the other side of it is that you don't know what's going to happen with this boat. She carries thousands of tons of fuel and bunker fuel and diesel fuel. And if anything gets to one of those tanks, then you could have a catastrophic explosion.
And that could affect people, I mean, even the firefighters on shore, on the dock.
It could affect us all the way over to here, because it'll blow pieces of metal 1,000 yards.
All right, Captain John Eddy, thank you so much. And we're going to check back in with him at 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, and 6 o'clock, as we are out live right now with Marine 4 off Blunt Island and the Freedom Boat Club. For now, we're going to send it back to you, Vic Michelucci, Channel 4, the local station.
Let's take another look from Sky 4. You can see the thick, black, acrid smoke. It could be a couple of things. You've got some cars that had gasoline. You have some electric cars on board. You're talking about the danger of letting the firefighters go back in. There could be further explosions, and Rich mentioned something. Think junked cars. Junked cars have tires on them. Rubber tires are a petroleum product. If you've ever seen a tire fire, you know that those tires also cause thick, black, acrid smoke. And Rich had mentioned that to me. That could also be a source of that thick black smoke that you're seeing right now. And that's one of the reasons that this firefight may go on for days or perhaps even weeks, Lauren.
That's right. And we also just got an update a few moments ago on how the firefighters are doing. News4JAX reporter Jen Reddy is live outside of UF Health, where those firefighters are recovering. Jen, we just heard from the chief that it is going to be a long recovery for them.
Lauren, I just spoke with Randy Wise earlier this morning, who is the president of the Jacksonville Association of Firefighters. And just like the chief, he says that these firefighters have a long recovery ahead of them, but they are getting good reports this morning and they are doing well. So that is one positive that they are seeing this morning. 8 of these firefighters, as we know, were injured after an explosion on the ship. And just like the chief just mentioned, we are learning that some of these firefighters are being released, but some are still in the hospital and they are stable. The chief asking for prayers and support, and we are seeing that from agencies and departments all across our area. Randy Wise says going into a ship that is on fire is one of the most dangerous things that firefighters can do, and he says that it could have been a much different outcome.
I think we had great leadership out there that were able to get everybody out when they needed to. You never want to even walk away with injuries, but this could have been a whole lot worse if it wasn't for the leadership that we had out there.
Mayor Lenny Curry is also asking the community to give their support and prayers for these firefighters and their families as they recover. As I mentioned, messages of support are pouring in from different agencies and departments all across our area and in the state. Coming up tonight at 5:30, we will have more on those messages and what Randy Wise says those messages mean to them during this time. Jennifer Reddy, Channel 4, the local station.
Now, our live coverage continues on News4JAX.com right now. We'll have updates throughout the course of the afternoon, so we invite you to rejoin us tonight at 5 o'clock. And again, News4JAX.com should anything new develop throughout the course of the afternoon. And there's an interesting gallery of photos from the fire right there on the home page. One more look-see from Sky 4 right now as it hovers over the seam. You'll notice that as things continue to burn throughout the course of the day and the afternoon, the amount of smoke coming from the hull of that ship will increase at times, it will decrease at other times, and depending on the direction of the wind, I've got to wonder out loud whether or not it will be a problem for people traveling across the Dames Point Bridge.